Well, good evening. We're here this evening for the Standards and Audit Committee. The first item on the agenda, apologies for absence. I see Councillor Potter. Are there any others? Okay. So moving on to item 2 of the minutes. Just want to make sure that they're the correct record so we can approve them. Is that agreed? Yes, good, lovely, thank you. So item 3, items of urgent business. I haven't received any as yet, so there'll be none on the agenda this evening. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Anyone have any of those? No. And then straight on to the annual complaints and inquiries report for 2019 and 20. And that's going to be Lee, I understand.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can all hear me. So this is our annual complaints report for the period 2019-20. I will present a high-level summary report and then I'll be happy to answer any questions following the summary. In terms of complaint volumes, the reporting period is showing a reduction in complaints compared to last year. Approximately 100, just under 100 complaints fewer this year compared to 18-19. In terms of complaints performance, 86% of complaints were responded to within time frame. This is a slight dip on our performance the previous year, where 89% complaints were responded to within time frame. In relation to the percentage of complaints upheld, the reporting period is showing an improvement compared to the previous year, whereby 40% of complaints were upheld. Lower is better in this case. Last year, 43% of complaints were upheld, so this is an improvement. The detail for this report is contained within Appendix 1 on page 29. Appendix 1 provides information on the top 10 complaint areas and then provides information on escalation statistics and percentage upheld stats for those top 10 complaint areas. And it also details the plans the services have to reduce complaints going forward in the form of learning from complaints. Appendix 2 on page 57 and Appendix 3 on page 69 provide a high-level summary of adult social care and children's social care complaints. In terms of members' inquiries, 3,580 members' inquiries were received, 96% responded to within time frame, with an average 3 working days to respond to those inquiries. In terms of high-level directorate summary, there's some positives in terms of the learning and overall reductions in complaints. In terms of housing, housing repairs continue to fall year on year, and there's also a reduction in percentage of complaints, which is positive, upheld, which is positive. In terms of environment, there's been a significant reduction in upheld complaints. In terms of finance and council tax, the report is showing a very slight increase in complaints, but this really is incredibly low for this type of service. So in my view, it's a real positive, and the percentage upheld figure is really low at 18%. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Lee's Chair, if I may. Hi Lee, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Gary.
Yes? No?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to page 20. We're looking at Ombudsman inquiries. We've had some fines for financial remedies to pay, and they've all been for maladministration causing injustice. Can you sort of expand on those, please?
Yeah, bear with me a second. Let me pull up the page this end. Okay, so it may be. Can I suggest we go? What I've done, Councillor Collins, is if you look at also on page 20. If you look at page 24, so that will also pick up on all those compensation payments as well there. as part. So that would include the stuff that's in section 2.4. So this represents the compensation payments paid out for the council for the reporting period, and obviously, each case is different. So, do you want me to go through every single one, or is there a particular one or two that you want me to focus on?
There's two of them. Delays in education. That's the gave us we had to pay the largest amount, 5,675. The second one is just, from my point of view, a data protection leak, or is it? Disclosing landlord's name to tenants. What happened and why was that? Did that occur, please?
Okay, I'll pick up on the first one. So this was the payment of 5,675. So what this complaint related to was the payment was made because in relation to delays on education, health and care plan for a particular complainant's son. So there were delays in actually in putting that plan in place, and as a result of that complaint, the council had to pay around about just under £4,000 for as a failure to provide speech and language therapies over a 15-month period. It also had to pay £1,250 to provide hydrotherapy as a form of treatment, and there was a payment of around about £300 for time and trouble. So that was that particular complaint. In relation to the data protection one, it was just purely an error. So the council disclosed some personal elements of a landlord's details to a particular tenant at the wrong time. So that was the £100 payment that related to that case. But it was pure error.
Thank you, Lee.
Any further questions?
No further questions.
Thank you. The total, might have got this wrong, don't know, but the total paid out in complaints is sort of up nearly enough £80,000, which seems a lot to me. It might not to others, it does seem quite a bit. I was wondering how we're going to sort of try and, I know it's hard to make sure it's happened again, but how we can, as far as possible, check up to make sure that plans that we've got in place to stop or to prevent these sort of failures happening again are working, and we won't end up with paying out loads of compensation.
Sorry, Councillor, are you referring to the compensation table on 2.9?
Probably. Page 20. Bottom of page 23. There's some figures there, and when I added it all up, it come to £79,759. This is a cost. This is in relation. This is what this table is just trying to show is the cost of a complaint. So this is based on the total number of complaints that received by the council, and and what that cost the council to process that complaint at stage 1 based on officer time, and the same for stage 2 and stage 3. So obviously the fewer complaints we receive as a council, and the complaints are going down, then that number will come down as well. So that's an indicative estimate on the time it takes the council to investigate complaints.
Okay, so item 5, is that noted? So item 6, standards and audit, the Internal Audit Charter 2020. Who's going to take that? Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the Internal Audit Charter, which defines internal audit's purpose, authority and responsibility, and establishes internal audit's position in the council. Ordinarily, this would be done biannually, and was brought to the committee last year, but due to changes in senior management roles and responsibilities and David's team moving from finance to environment and highways. Just thought it was timely just to bring it back. Pages 85 to 92 are the main body of the charter. It's actually quite a straightforward document, so I'm just happy to take any questions.
No questions, Chair.
Any questions? No. So we'll move on to the next item that's noted, which is the counter fraud and investigation, the quarterly update.
Thank you, Chair. That's me. This report is the first quarter's update on the progress made in delivering the counter-fraud strategy for 2020-21. Obviously, this period was greatly affected by the COVID incident that's obviously taken place, the global pandemic, and a number of changes were made within the service to make sure we could respond appropriately. During that period, we saw 120 reports of suspected fraud being received by the service, and of those, 20 matters were closed, mainly in response to the fact we're in emergency management protocol rather than the usual way of working for the service. That included many of the courts being closed around the country and us being unable to pursue any litigation against individuals. But obviously that work is still being maintained by the service, and where we can act, we will going forward. One of the major things the council did in relation to finance was obviously provide a number of grants to local businesses, and with one particular matter, us working with the Revenue Service as administered that scheme, identified an £85,000 fraud where an individual had used false details to obtain money as part of that scheme. The team obviously reacted very well. We identified the individual within a week. The team arrested that person, searched their premises, recovered the 85k and put it back into the council's finances. So really good response to that incident. You'll notice in Appendix 1, which is our proactive work plan, we've introduced in that plan a specific part looking at post-assurance work. So we're working with the Internal Audit Service to look at the payments the councils have made under that scheme, and obviously applying some of those controls to it to see whether there's any other potential frauds that have taken place, and we'll obviously act accordingly. That's also led us to bring forward a pilot we were going to introduce as a service, looking at our customer gateways to try and make sure we know our customer. It's a term they use in banking to make sure we know who we do business with, and that's part of the overall anti-money laundering controls we're trying to introduce this year. So that particular incident has enabled us to design that and pilot that as part of the grants process. I'm obviously happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, Councillor.
I just want to make a comment and say well done again to David Kleinberg and the rest of the anti-fraud team. That was a good result with the 85,000 fraudulent grant being discovered. And normal high standards, well done, and may you long continue to be as successful and even more successful, I hope, for the future. Thank you.
Yes, just reflecting on what Councillor Collins has said, indeed that identification of the 85,000 fraud was excellent news, and well done.
We're going to come to you now, Councillor Spillman.
Thank you very much. Can I just say apologies for not being in person? Me? Never, Gerard. I'd just like to say apologies for not being there in person. I've managed to pick up tonsillitis, so I'm feeling a bit under the weather. But I just wanted to know what you thought are there any new risks of fraud that are specific to new opportunities that have been brought about by the pandemic? Are there any new ways or new risks or increases to the same sort of fraud that we've seen in the past, but because of the light touch bureaucracy that's going on, specifically related to the pandemic? Have you got any thoughts on that, David?
What I would say is we've certainly seen that some of the known offenders we've dealt with previously are still committing offences. They're just using it in a different way or against a different scheme. That doesn't mean to say the fraud's gone up. We're not losing more money. It just means that we've been able to transfer resources to those particular schemes, such as grants, and make sure we're there to respond appropriately. I don't think there's any new frauds. It's all down to the same process. It's either impersonation or application fraud. And again, using the learning we have from our benefit systems, our housing systems, we've kept that knowledge on those front-end systems to make sure that people don't take advantage, and it's worked. And what I would say, in the 85k fraud detected, that's us working hand in hand with the frontline service. So Andy Britton's revenues team were the ones that spotted it and worked with us to identify it and fix it and remediate quickly. And again, it just shows that ongoing work we're doing across the council anyway. So, yeah.
Sorry, your hand's still up. Do you still have a question?
But obviously, you do a lot of work with other councils still. That work's dried up. And obviously, there's no... I can imagine that some of these cases are going to be quite low on the priority list when the court's open, just because of their nature compared to some of the other cases that the court are going to be stacking up. Have you got any update really on the projections regarding any potential losses in revenue from the last report?
I'd probably say that the biggest impacts we've seen on counter fraud work is in the housing tenancy fraud. The government have done a further 6-month extension to any proceedings in the civil court to recover properties lost through Section 21 notices and recovering property. That doesn't mean to say we're not still investigating using other sanctions available. It just means we have to work differently. What the problem is, I think, considering at the moment we are, is there's going to be a nexus created where we may prove someone has obtained a property by deception. We can convict them in the criminal court, but then they still can't take their property away. And that's something we're working with central government to understand how that will work out in practice. But actually, the work is still there. It's just making sure that we continue working with the services affected and preventing it where we can.
Councillor Spillman, do you still wish to ask another question?
Moving on, item 8, who's taking that one?
Thank you, Chair. What I'll do, I'll give a brief introduction to the report and then I'm happy to take any questions. One of the functions of Standards and Audit Committee is to provide independent assurance that the Council's risk management arrangements are adequate and effective. To enable the committee to consider the effectiveness of the risk and opportunity management arrangements, the report provides details of how the key risks and opportunities facing the council are identified and managed. Work was undertaken with services, department management teams, performance board and directors board during June to August to refresh the register, and the outcome of the review is shown in Appendix 1 and 2. Appendix 1, which is on pages 109 to 110 of the agenda papers, is the dashboard table, which provides a summary of the items contained in the register mapped against the council's priorities. Appendix 2, which is on pages 111 to 138 of the agenda papers, is the risk and opportunities in focus report, which contains the main items identified by performance board and directors board that should be focused on this quarter. And a summary of the position for each of the in-focus items is included under section 3.3 of the report, which starts at the top of page 103. The rationale for the items in focus is based on the numeric value of the rating, so any 16s or 12 will automatically become in focus. Any 9s or 8s are considered on a case-by-case basis for the in-focus report. For the committee's information, the criteria guide for impact and likelihood levels are included under Appendix 3. and show the guidelines used to rate and prioritise the items. That's a brief introduction. I'm happy for any questions.
Any questions?
Yes, please, Chair. I'm looking at page 109, it would be. Yeah, 109. I'm looking at the bit at the bottom, impact of the UK withdrawal from the EU. A couple of things have happened since, I dare say, you put the report together. Would it still be in green, or are we looking at amber now?
In response to that, you'll see from the actual the latest rating, it's actually the rating's gone up from the previous review, and I think the thinking around that is around obviously the working towards the transition stage to the which I think is up until the 31st of December, and potentially I think it obviously might be still a no deal scenario, so it's obviously bringing out the plans that we had for no deal, and that's the reason why there's increase into there. Obviously we have done a load of work around this. Obviously we'll have to still review this. It is a living document, like you say. Perhaps, I don't know, maybe been optimistic on the 4. But I suppose, provided we've got all the plans in place, then if we have a no deal or if we go with a deal, then at least the council's got the plans in place. So, yeah, I think when we do the next review, and then obviously the report that comes later, then we'll pick up any adjustment in that.
Yeah, so that's a movable feast, and it seems to be changing by the day. So you've got your work cut out for you there. The other one is the impact of coronavirus, another movable feast. I know we're looking at sort of hopefully only being temporary, but have we factored in this carrying on till the end of the year?
So I think as it's picked up in the actual report and in the summary, in the exec summary, if you like, it's not classed as it's not going to be a short-term fix. It's going to be with us for a while. I think the forecast rating on that of 12. When I look at some of the latest reports around the impact of coronavirus, the stuff that's gone to overview and scrutiny, and some of the finance stuff, I think that forecast rating personally should be 16 at the end of the year. Like I say, with the risk and opportunity management arrangements, what we do is we refresh the register every year. So for that one, because it's one of those longer term issues, we'll be refreshing that at the end of the year. My thoughts are perhaps in the next review that forecast rating will change and be a 16, obviously because of some of the stuff and whatever that we're facing currently. It will be a movable feast, I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. Looking through the register, I couldn't, unless it's in somewhere else, I couldn't see where you've look at the savings we've got to make to balance the budget next year. Apparently the savings is about 20, I don't know how much the savings are, but there don't seem to be a risk of how we're going to make those savings up so we can have a balanced budget in light of everything we've got, not just with Corona, with like leaving the EU and everything else. So how are we going to ensure across the whole of the council that we end up with a balanced budget and we do that in the right way?
Yeah, as I think it's pointed out in the report, this was done sort of around sort of June time, this review. As part of that review, we had the impact of coronavirus. What we tried to do is one of those actions in that management action plan for the impact of coronavirus. We played in the finance side of things. Things have moved on. There has been a sort of the stuff around the MTFS and the impact on that. Previously, at some other years, we have had a risk in there around the MTFS. It will be a discussion with finance to say, shall we keep it in as a separate item, or shall we have a new risk for the MTFS? But I'll let Sean.
Sean.
Chair, if I may, thank you for the question. Yes, as Andy's pointed out, this is an earlier version. The real impact
has become known over, since the end of that quarter, really. It will certainly be going in as a risk. How best we project that through there, we'll discuss with Andy to put on, but it will certainly be on the next risk register that you see coming forward. We went to corporate overview and scrutiny and discussed part of that on Tuesday night. It's at Cabinet next week, and then further reports to Cabinet and ONS over the next couple of months as well to discuss the approach, certainly, and what the overall impact could be.
Just picking up on that, Sean, do we read into that to lighten the load on the budget, we might borrow some extra money to finance that over a number of years?
Not at all. We can't borrow money just to actually pay for our revenue expenditure. We can borrow money under capital circumstances, which is what we've done under the previous investment strategy, to create revenue income. But we can't just go out and borrow. That's not within the legal remit within a local authority.
Councillor Spillman.
Councillor Spillman, I think you're on mute.
This committee is really accessible now in a way that it hasn't been previously due to the fact that it's all on YouTube. And if I just turn, I'm sure there's a lot of people in the borough who, there's nothing else on the telly and they're watching this committee right now. If they saw this lovely chart with numbers all over it, they wouldn't really have any insight at all into how the numbers are reached, the process, and then what happens then, what the process is from that point. Once something is flagged in red, who does it go to next? What are the meetings that take place? Where the decision making lies. So if you could just illuminate people as to how you reach these numbers and what happens next, I think it would be very beneficial to all, to be honest.
So as Appendix 3, like I say, that was the criteria guide on how the risks and opportunities are rated. In the actual risk documentation included under Appendix 2, the InFocus report, for each risk we'll rate it as an inherent rating. So what we take into consideration is we don't consider any actions or controls in place, and that gives us a feel for what the inherent rating is. For each of the residual risks, what we then do is look at the current actions and controls in place, which then gives us a feel for what the actual residual then risk is. And then as we then go on and do each of the reviews, we then have a revised residual risk, again based on that the criteria guide under Appendix 3. Which then we then look at the further actions that are in place. We look at the effectiveness of those actions, and then that will give us a then feel for the actual revised residual risk. What we do as part of this, we look at the action planning and the actions that we've got in place and the timescales for some of that, and then what we try to then do is then put a forecast rating. So if all the actions are in place and they're adequate and effective, then by the time we get to the forecast rating, that will be the position when the item's assessed at that point. That's a brief overview, perhaps, and gives you a feel for how we arrive at some of those scorings in Appendix 1 under the dashboard table.
So if
Phil, would you stand up the question?
Yeah, one more. Yeah. So if you identify a risk, and then you look at the provision that's in place, and you make the decision that for whatever reason, one department, according to your review, isn't meeting that risk, what do you do as auditors?
Chair, if I may, I'll take that. So there is, first of all, there is a cross-service performance board that looks at all of these risks as well. It's part of the overall performance management of the authority. And in some ways it can be escalated up through that group. Should the risk be manageable but not being managed, then of course it would come through to the relevant directors, and the conversations would take place there.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that.
Another question?
No, I'm happy with that. Thanks very much.
And just on that, Sean, regarding Impulse Leisure, are we any further forward on Impulse Leisure now? Oh.
Sorry, Chair, I'm trying to see the link. On Impulse Leisure, no, there have been still a number of conversations. The approach, no support has actually been agreed with Impulse Leisure yet, and as I say, discussions still taking place to the best of my knowledge.
Is that item noted? So on to the next item, Sean.
I've just got a question about the ratings. So I can observe that there's a number of these risks on the register that remain at the same rating across a period of time. And just sort of picking up on one of those, the A13 widening project. So we have an inherent risk of 16, and we have the residual risk after the mitigating actions have been applied still as 16. And we also have the forecast also as 16. So, do you think that the mitigation actions are sufficient? Is that risk being managed effectively? And if so, is there a future date when that might return to a more palatable risk rating?
Thank you. As I say, looking at that is one of the, obviously, the items that was in focus. And the actual risk and the management action plan is attached to the under Appendix 2 on pages 116. As I say, it's been judged as to the current controls in place, and obviously the rating's still at 16. Then there is obviously the additional actions to manage the risk. I think in some ways it's been sort of accepted that the risk is still going to be with us as at 31st of March 2021 at a rating of 16. But it is a case of there's that ongoing review and monitoring of the programme, which will continue right through until the actual project is delivered. And I think now, looking at some of the reports, that the actual sort of completion date for it now is sort of the winter of 2021. Yes, there is a load of work going on around it, but there is obviously the stuff around the potential delays, and especially with the impact of COVID and that as well. So I think that's all been taken into the evaluation, and that's why the rating is at 16.
Anna, can I invite you into the conversation, please?
Certainly, I can just provide some additional information if that helps. Obviously, we've reported extensively on the A13 to PTR and to Standards and Audit previously. Members will recall at the last meeting in July, we made a report around the contracts that we had in place for the A13, and the fact that it is very difficult to control costs under an NEC3 option C contract, where there is a target price and a defined cost price and a gain share or pain share, as the case may be. So we talked about that, if you recall, members, at the last meeting, but also it's very difficult under an NEC3 contract to control programme, and members will be coming on to this in one of the subsequent items, but in my report on the A13 we make reference to programme and the 4 instances that enable us to reject a constructor's programme, which are very, very limited. So for those reasons, as a consequence of the contract, it's very, very difficult for us to control those costs. In terms of mitigation, obviously we'll be aware, members are aware, we've had some issues with the programme and with the project generally. We did a project improvement plan. We've implemented those improvements. We've bolstered the resource on the team. We've improved the expertise of the team. We are challenging and reviewing everything that we can possibly challenge and review to make sure that the contractors and all parties are held to account, and that we can demonstrate that the money that is expended on this project has been expended in an appropriate and proper manner. And unfortunately, there are inherent risks that we will carry on this project right the way through to completion. And that's the reason why the rating is very difficult to mitigate, I'm afraid.
Right, on to item 9, investment briefing, Sean.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a brief update since the report that the committee considered in July. We weren't looking to repeat everything that was done, so literally we're just looking to update from that time. Before actually going into the report, one of the things that you'll remember corporate overview and scrutiny requested in January, and at the council meeting in July was also confirmed, was around improving the democratic oversight of investments. It was just to inform you there is a meeting taking place on Tuesday next week that Councillor Hebb has called of the various leaders of the groups of the council to discuss how that's going to go forward with some propositions as well. So that is in train and should ultimately end up with changes to the constitution to bring forward a committee of some form. In terms of the updates, and I'll take members' advice on how you might want to see this going forward. The main things for us, we haven't done any further investments, but that would then be the avenue of reporting the investments in more detail through whatever new committee is formed. So at 2.5, the main updates that I could see that would be required is on the figures in terms of our gross borrowings and investments, and therefore the council's net debt. And that is set out in 2.5. You can see that there has been an increase in the net debt, and I point that out in 2.6. That has come from twofold, really. One is the change in the council's cash flow, the spend going out through COVID, but less cash coming in through fees and charges, council tax and business rates. So there is certainly an element of that. And we're certainly hoping that will balance out further over the year, that it's more of a deferment rather than a loss. And also there's the funding of the capital programme that's being funded through prudential borrowing as well. So that builds on the overall borrowings that we require. But I wasn't going to say any more than that at the moment, Chair, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Councillor Collins.
Just one, Chair, please. Sean, I just want to sort of draw everyone's attention to 2.11. Which says there's still been no adverse impact from the start of the COVID pandemic on the council's investments and income streams remain stable. So that's a vindication of your approach to investments, would you not think?
We pointed out in July, and I know it was pointed out in other reports and so on in other forums, that we stayed away from a number of the types of investments that a number of other authorities have been into, such as shopping centres, retail parks and the like, which have been very much adversely impacted. The renewable energy has not been adversely impacted during this time, and that's been one of our largest ones. CCLA, the Churches, Charities and Local Authorities Property Fund, again are maintaining dividends into the council as well. So at this stage, no, there has been no adverse impact from COVID.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, in light of COVID and the fact that we are now officially in recession, do you think that, would you think the investments will still reach their full potential, and what have we got with authorities like ourselves needing more cash flow? If an authority on the report it says about that bond issuers might require their money earlier than originally, and so if they do we have the financial capability to pay them? That makes sense. I'm not too good on the financial jargon, sorry.
It does. I think you're looking at that the other way around. It's the people that have borrowed the money from us, so that we have the council has lent the money to, that are paying us returns, have the ability to pay that back early. If they do, then obviously the investment, instead of running its full course, will finish early. We get the funding back, which we then have to pay back as well. We can't hold the debt while we don't have the investment, so we would end up repaying that back. So we'll save on interest, but we would then lose on investment income.
Just so I understand this properly, so how could that impact with the budgets, and how does this mean anything we need to look at on the risk register or anything?
Investments are certainly on the risk register as we stand anyway. If anybody was going to come forward in terms of anybody that we hold investments with wants to repay early, then there would be an adverse impact on the MTFS, and the positions that we've already quoted would get worse unless we took out further investments to counter those. At this stage, though, the MTFS assumes no further investments at this stage to increase our level of investments until such time as the committee is formed and we can have wider discussion and debate about it.
Councillor Spillman, we'll come to you now.
Thank you very much. I asked you a question last time and you couldn't answer it at the time, so I'm hoping you can answer it now. What is the market value of the bonds if you were selling them? What's the rough market value if you were selling them today? Is it less or is it more than what you bought them for?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to say that I still can't answer that. The market value of the bonds for ourselves is at the price that we paid. That doesn't change. The level of debt is not linked to any increases or decreases in the valuation of the asset. If we were to dispose of them, it would depend who's in the market of wanting to purchase them. They are returning above par rates compared to a number of other rates, which would make them attractive. But equally, disposing of them in the current market could be quite difficult with the various uncertainty there is around local government funding and the like.
Councillor Spillman, do you still have another question?
Are we looking at a? I know the council. I know the council must have an eye on the impact of COVID on the local economy, because obviously that has not only business rates, but that has a knock-on into employment, council tax receipts. Are the council weighing up a programme of investments within Thurrock to support business growth and job growth in Thurrock?
If we're talking about the nature of this report, the types of investments that we're talking about in this report, we haven't done yet. If anybody within a body, organisation, company, as opposed to necessarily individuals, came forward within Thurrock with possible requests that met the council's risk ratings and so on, and we went through due diligence, then it's possible. But at this stage, that isn't the case. And as I say, actually not just within Thurrock, but any of the types of investments we've been doing, we're not progressing at this stage any further ones, as I say, until we've resolved the issue around the greater democratic oversight. In terms of other types of investments within Thurrock, what we are trying to do very much, and Andy Millard might want to come in here, Planning, Transportation and Regeneration Committee on Monday received reports on both the local plan and the economic development strategy, and so very much a focus and drive from the council in those areas would be one that would actually support investment and growth within the borough.
Thank you. No further questions. Thanks.
Councillor Spillwood, do you still have another question?
No, I don't know.
Andy, would you like to come in now?
Chair Committee, good evening. Yes, just to pick up on Sean's summary of where we're at with the revised economic development strategy. We saw the need in a pre-COVID world to revise that strategy, but it's become even more important because of the pandemic. As Sean said, we took to overview and scrutiny on Monday a report which will travel to Cabinet on the 16th. At that stage, we'll be looking for Cabinet to approve for consultation a totally revamped economic development strategy that has longevity in the sense that it is a long-term strategy, and sitting alongside it will be a series of implementation plans which will see delivery through necessary phases first, and hopefully relatively short a period of either will focus upon recovery, and then beyond that periods of growth and prosperity that will drive forward, again as Sean said, alongside the local plan as the driving force for growth and investment in the borough. So a very advanced work in progress, and something I think which will serve to really good ends in terms of helping us through these difficult times.
Is that noted, that report? On to item 10, the A13 widening project. Is that Andy?
Anna.
Do we'll bring you in now?
I think it's me that's going to present the report, Chair. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. Members will recall that this report was brought back at the request of this committee. It was considered at the last meeting in July. Since that time, we have made a fair amount of progress because of good weather, and that progress is set out in section 3. We've had a series of road closures. We've been progressing with the completion of the structures and the drainage. We have identified that £7.5 million of expenditure has been invested in the local economy, and by local we mean within 10 to 15 miles of the scheme. We have recently received an excellent rating by the Considerate Constructors scheme after an audit and a review and a site inspection was undertaken. And members may recall back in April this year there was a gas strike at the Orsett Junction when we were excavating some supervised gas excavation works. We have undertaken a full investigation and report to the HSE, and they have notified us today that no further action is necessary in that regard. With regard to programme, we had a fair amount of discussion about the programme at the last committee. We remain on target at the current time as published, autumn-winter 2021. With regard to budget, this remains the same at this current time, although we will be undertaking a reforecasting exercise in the near future as a consequence of the well-documented information we've provided about COVID-19 and the impacts that we unfortunately are inevitable as a consequence of that. In relation to the shortfall, the update since the last meeting was that we have undertaken an officer workshop and pulled together a list of ideas about how we can explore that and how the shortfall can potentially be funded. And the idea is that we'll take that forward in the coming weeks and obviously report back to this committee. Apart from that, there isn't a huge amount, I'm afraid, to report on since July, but I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, Anna. You reported back in the last meeting that we saw from the portfolio hold that there was a £41 million overspend. That was in the papers. Then this went down to 35. Then I believe you indicated it was 29.4. And on page 149, we're now saying the forecasted funding gap is at 26.9 million. Can we be clear on where we are with that funding gap?
Councillor Rice, the figures that are in the report as published have not changed since the last meeting in July. They're exactly the same figures. I'm not sure where the £41 million that you refer to comes from, because that's certainly never a figure that I have been reporting on. So I'm not entirely sure where that comes from.
Well, my understanding was that that was a figure that was released in conjunction with Andy Millard and the portfolio holder at the time. But, you know, all we're seeking really is the clarification of where we are. Is it 26.9 million? Or are we up to 41 or 35 or 29.4? That's really what we're trying to grasp.
Councillor Rice, on the current forecast, out-term forecast, based on the exercise that we did to feed into the value for money exercise we did for CELEP to secure the additional £8.9 million worth of funding, those figures have not changed. There has been a level of stability on the project since January in terms of the forecast. As I've just mentioned, we know that we are going to have financial impacts from COVID. We know that the contractor is intending to make a claim for a compensation event as a consequence of COVID. And at the moment, because the pandemic is still very much live, we are unable to quantify the true extent of what the COVID impacts will be at this current time. But what we are doing is making sure that the team reports and identifies a distinction between any additional cost on the project and any additional cost as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm sure that at some point in the future, when we've undertaken the reforecasting exercise, there will be an additional report that comes back to this committee on a quarterly basis, as you've requested.
Sean, just for your good self, whether it's 41 or 29 or 35 or 27 or 26.9, will we be actually borrowing the money to oversee this overspend as its capital?
Chair, my answer will be the same as it was in July to this committee and to the Planning, Transportation and Regeneration Committee in July as well, which is obviously we have a contractual obligation to meet the overall costs of this. But as Anna Eastgate has already pointed out in this presentation, there is a workshop going through, which was a commitment within the last reports, to try and identify other funding sources, be it from government or private sector contributions and the like, to be able to close that gap and hopefully be able to clear it completely, would be obviously the preference. But I would also have to point out to members that if that cannot be achieved, any balance is a contractual obligation on this authority. It can then be met from council resources, which could be borrowing, it could be capital receipts.
No questions, thank you.
Councillor Kim? Okay, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Anna.
Bring you in now, Councillor Spill.
I just wanted to know, I mean, I know Sean's alluded to it there, but have we got has there been any development in the thinking on 3.12 in terms of how we're going to bridge this gap? Has there been any movement on where we think we're going to find this money?
I'm looking towards Anna there. Hopefully, Anna may need to just go back over the comments of the workshop that took place that she mentioned earlier.
That's fine. I'm happy to. So we undertook a workshop with a range of officers from various different backgrounds, including the team that deals with CELEP and the local growth partnership, highways, finance, myself, and we explored to try and come up with a list of all potential income sources that could contribute to this scheme, given its significance for the South Essex region. We have come up with a long list. We need to go through that long list and identify what is possible, because I'm sure there are some elements in that list that potentially aren't possible. So we need to filter them, explore them a little bit more before we can come up with a short list of recommendations that will go through a decision-making process.
Right, that item's noted. So on to item 11, the Stamfordley Hope Transport Project.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be even briefer with this one. So again, this report was brought at request of members and we last reported on it in July. In terms of progress, work is progressing on a single design option, which will require a new planning permission. We have a report going to Cabinet next week to secure authority for a procurement exercise. And in light of comments and concerns from members about the ability to control cost, we are developing the detailed design of this scheme to the nth degree to enable us to go out to tender on a fixed price contract, which will give us some certainty on price. Apart from that, Chair, we've had a recent steering group where we documented previously we've invited local resident representation onto, and we have the attendance of Councillor Hebb and Councillor Piccolo as ward councillors involved in the decision making and shaping of that scheme. We've recently treated the local area for Japanese knotweed invasive species, and we've managed to convince the Port of London Authority to treat their side of the embankment as well. So that's the latest, really, very latest in terms of progress. Apart from that, there isn't a huge amount to report on, I'm afraid, for this meeting.
So, Anna, we're seeking a further planning permission. You may well be aware that we've had documentation and reports to the Planning Committee suggesting that we have 2.5 people that look after legal agreements. Are we sure that we're going to get this planning permission out quickly so the scheme can progress and be on target? Because obviously the last thing we want is a further delay, because we've only got a locum solicitor, and obviously our own legal officer as part of the numbers dealing with the legal framework of planning agreements.
Councillor Rice, there won't be a need for a legal agreement for the planning consent for this scheme, simply because the council can't enter into a Section 106 agreement with itself. So that wouldn't be a requirement. So we don't need to have the legal team involved necessarily. It will be an application to the planning department. The planning department obviously have strict timescales, statutory timescales to determine a planning application. And we don't envisage any problems because a substantive amount of the documentation is there already. The reason for a new planning permission is one of efficiency and cost saving actually for the scheme. The original station building footprint was being relocated to a slightly different situation within the site. As a part of the pause and review of the scheme, we've identified the need to site the station building on the footprint of the existing building. One, that ticks a box for local residents because it provides a natural screening and barrier for them in terms of passengers moving to and from the station. But secondly, because it avoids the need for substantive concrete works in the substructure to the building, because we can make use of existing foundations. So it's a positive story all round, and hopefully that will mean less time in terms of construction too.
Any questions? Okay. Yes, Councillor Kent.
Sorry, in light of the new planning application we've got going through for the site, do we know, is there a new timetable of when it will be completed? And are there any additional costs that I'm just worried about the money that we'd already secured from other areas. Is there a deadline by which we had to have the planning permission granted by, or things done? Are we going to be losing that money that had originally been given to us, providing we'd made certain progress, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Councillor Kent. So we have £800,000 of select money, thereabouts. It's 700 and something thousand. Forgive me for not having the exact figures at my fingertips, but we have about £800,000 of CELEP funding, which needs to be spent before the end of March 2021. We're confident as a team we will be able to spend that money, but irrespective of that, all of the projects have been having conversations with CELEP about timescales and projects that are likely to have had an impact, whatever that may be, as a consequence of CELEP, of COVID-19. So CELEP are fairly relaxed about that, but in any event, I'm fairly confident that we will spend that money in the time available to us. So that shouldn't be a problem. And the other question related to the planning permission,
Yeah, but if we have any additional costs relating to putting that new planning application in.
So obviously there'll be a fee charge for submitting a planning application. We are having discussions with the planners on a pre-application basis on the single design that we have. At the moment, we've had positive feedback. We don't envisage there being any problems. Obviously, it has to follow due process because that's what has to happen. But at the moment, we don't envisage any additional delays as a consequence of planning per se. But we are envisaging that we may have some impacts from COVID on this project that haven't hit us yet. Once we start moving into physical works on the site.
Any more questions? No. Right. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
And we then move on. That's noted, that report. Then we move on to item 12, which is a matter of note, just a work programme. Is that noted? And thank you very much for your attendance this evening and a safe trip home. Thank you very much.